Good morning, Mr. Salcito. The Society Les Mardis de l'ESSEC is delighted to have you here today for the launch of the new educative partnership between Microsoft and ESSEC Business School. But we are also very pleased as a society to have you here for the interview. Mr. Salcito, you're the Vice President for Microsoft Education Worldwide, and I must say you have quite a history with Microsoft. I even suspect you to keep up a love story with that company. You joined Microsoft 20 years ago in 1992. I guess you were drawn immediately to educational issues as you started working in the marketing department. You helped architect Microsoft's outreach plan and helped build marketing plans for softwares such as Windows 95. You then became a general manager of education in the US, and in this position, you were in charge of Microsoft's project related to primary, secondary, and post-secondary school. The idea was, and still is, to enhance learning by increasing the role played by technology in that matter. You therefore developed partnerships and innovative programs to better support education customers nationally. In 2003, and under your leadership, Microsoft committed itself to build the school of the future, embodied today by a very innovative high school in the city of Philadelphia. I hope this doesn't imply replacing teachers by robots, otherwise you would have to cope with the strike of the national education. And you know here in France that they go on strike pretty easily, so please, I beg you, don't get on the wrong side. As Vice President for Microsoft Education today, you sit in various boards of experts in education in the US, and you coordinate the worldwide implementation of Microsoft's project. The aim of Microsoft's project is to use technology as a tool in order to optimize learning environment and student achievement. Let's hope for these students that they're quite pious, because according to a tawdry joke, when for Apple it's plug it and play, sometimes for Windows it's kind of more plug it and pray. But seriously though, it seems no one has to pray anymore for Windows to succeed in education innovation. Because in 2009, the Partners in Learning program you launched with Microsoft was awarded with the Public-Private Partnership Award by the US National Governor Association. Mr. Salcito, after all the interviews, posts, videos I've seen about you, I wouldn't say I know you personally. I assume you have quite an impressive team that controls your image on the net, because I couldn't find any information about your life before Microsoft. And on that point, you have not made my life easy for the biography. But what stands out is the limited amount of information what stands out of this limited amount of information I found about you is that you're passionate. You're the active blogger, and very active blogger, I should say, as you've been recently rewarded for the publicity of your post with 2 virtual gold medals. Congratulations. So I was saying you're the active blogger of Education Insights, the official Microsoft blog where you share your opinions on the news and great tendencies of education through technology. But you also hold a personal blog called Daily Adventures, where you intend to reveal every day the global heroes of education. And it seems to me that you transformed your job into a passion, into something that you defend not only for the business it represents, which is huge, by the way, but also because it is something you truly believe in. And I believe myself that it is somehow inspiring to have such a profile like yours here for our audience of future managers. Your blog, both the professional one and the personal one, is full of expression like, I was excited, amazing, let's make a difference. And I must say, those kind of expressions are really refreshing in a world that the media often describe as in a terrible crisis. And precisely, to conclude, your belief is that in this world of the 21st century, technology is the ultimate source of growth. In an interview for the bloggers of Hack College, you said, any industry today has an opportunity to be reinvigorated. Find where your passions are and apply technology to that. If you're interested in helping society or interested in finance, there are plenty of roles where technology can help. You know that in France, we have quite a tendency for being pessimistic about the future. So I rely on you today, on your enthusiasm, to show us that technology can prove us wrong. I wish you all a nice debate.
I didn't know as much of that about myself as you revealed. But thank you very much for being here. I really know that this time is precious. I know that many of you are squeezing this in on your lunch break between classes, so I thank you for being here. I know many of you, this is a mandatory attendance, so for those of you, I apologize, and hopefully we can have a good discussion. But a lot of the things you said are actually true. I am, unfortunately, my life before Microsoft, I don't remember too much of it. I started with Microsoft probably when I was about your age in college. I actually started with Microsoft when I was just in an undergraduate. I was always focusing on my career before. One of the things that I would certainly recommend for you is to don't wait for you to graduate to start what you want to do now. I had a magazine. I ran a music label. I worked on commercial production, making TV commercials, all while I was in school. And I actually started a full-time job at Microsoft when I was an undergraduate. Largely what I was doing is getting hamburgers for Bill Gates and other Microsoft executives when they came to visit. But I learned by being around leaders at Microsoft during very formative stages of the company. And that inspired me to stay on with Microsoft as I pursued my graduate studies and still am here today. But I was always able to connect my passion for what I do with the work that I do, whether it was in the work I did in marketing or certainly in education. And I have a sort of general philosophy for my folks is that's focus on what you do. I was just in a car ride yesterday with someone from Microsoft France. She was saying, how do I juggle all the things I have to do? I said, just pick the things that you like to do and do those first. And in many ways, that's what I've been doing in my career, and I have really been overjoyed by working in education. And before we get to the Q&A, I'm just going to give a quick summary of where we are in education around the world, and some of this will apply very much to formative changes that are happening here in France. In many ways, French has a rich education history. And in countries that have that, I'm going to be going to Japan next week, and Japan, I think, is another good example. There's often been a reluctance to change with technology because they have a very proud heritage in education and a very thoughtful approach to education. And those countries are typically behind transforming with 21st century skills in education with technology. So there's a huge opportunity in France to really bring some of the thinking and some of the challenges around the world to French schools. In many ways, leapfrog other countries who have done technology poorly in education for the last 20 years. And certainly the U.S. is a good example of a country that has been early adopters of technology and has learned by, in many cases, mistakes on how to improve and evolve technology in education. Now, in my job, just to give a sense of where I am, I get a chance to go around the world, and I travel. Typically, I'm about 60 countries a year. And that's an amazing opportunity because when you get a chance to travel for work, by the way, it's not fun or glamorous or anything like that. I am someone who is waiting for my luggage to still arrive from Rome. It's sometimes challenging, but it is amazing to see great people. And one of the best things about my job is I get a chance to talk to real heroes around the world, and those are often teachers. In some communities, these teachers are the difference between, in many cases, life and death for students. They provide them opportunities, hopes, and in some cultures, access to education isn't easy. It's not available for some. Based on gender, based on race, some folks can pursue certain careers and others can't. In parts of Africa, it's not safe for girls to study engineering or computer science, etc. So the realities around the world are very challenging, and certainly one of the things I love most about my job is I get a chance to see what's happening and try to make a difference. And that's a great joy. And certainly one of the biggest things I'll talk about is some of the trends. And one of the more exciting trends around education and society is there's a greater link between where we are in our economic conditions around the world and education. That always was not the case. 20 years ago, governments didn't invest in education because of their GDP or what was going on in their economic conditions. There wasn't a clear condition. today, many governments and many government leaders will state education as a key priority. Before, that was just to get votes. It felt nice to say, yeah, education, kids, teachers, yes, yes, yes. Today, there's a real recognition about where we are with regards to education and economic advantage. If you look about 30 years ago, Singapore's GDP and Jamaica's GDP was the same. And at that time, Jamaica made a very conscious effort to focus on tourism as their core philosophy and approach. And that makes sense in many ways. Singapore, at that same time, decided that we're really going to build a robust education environment to attract business, to create learned workers, to shift the workforce and the dynamics in Singapore. And the results have been clearly impacting the economy. And Singapore has one of the richest education systems around the world, and certainly a thriving economic base that's been built from that education investment. And that is a good thing for education, because it means more funding, more prioritization, but it also means more pressure on what's happening in the schools. And the reality, that's going to create a huge pressure and potential change. And technology is where change can happen in many cases in schools, and there's obviously lots of technology that you're familiar with. I would actually say most of what technology has been in education has been to just look at what we did before and just try to make a virtual representation of it. And that's not really going to change much. The real problem with technology in education is that nothing is really changed. We really have a long way to go to really change the way in which we learn. And certainly many of you understand this natively, but the systems often do not. And certainly that's one of the challenges we have to work collectively on. This other piece on 21st century learning is certainly something that I'll touch on importantly. And this is critical that we have to start doing in schools because of a lot of these things that are going on around the world. And the thing about 21st century skills is there's some economic realities that we have to embrace. And the reality is there's a shifting workforce. Many, many years ago, rows of desks and chairs in schools were supporting factory lines where there were rows and rows of workers, often not collaborating, doing a simple task, not really having to do anything to think creatively, and actually creative thinking was discouraged in those environments. The workforce today is very different. It requires dynamic leadership, creativity. You have to think not only outside of the box, but really reinvent the box itself. And that dynamic is really a priority. And one of the challenges that we have in many countries, Korea is a good example, a great education system, but they have huge youth unemployment because the education system is very much focused on assessment and performance and not creating the kind of 21st century skills that's needed to grow jobs, to influence entrepreneurship, to stabilize the economy with new infusion of talent and activity. So 21st century skills is critical. Now, in my career at Microsoft, I've probably hired about 200 people. And this is probably bad for many of you to hear, I rarely look at resumes. Now, part of that is because Microsoft has a very strong HR recruiting team, so I know that the people I'm interviewing at least have passed muster to some extent. But I care about how people think, how they respond to questions, how fast they are to think about scenarios that I put forth, and the way in which they carry themselves, the way in which they express the energy and passion about what they do. And that's what I hire against. I never ask any questions that you may be tested on. I never really look at the specifics of what they know. I care about what they're going to learn and how willingly and easily they are going to be adapting to the culture that we have at Microsoft. So the reality is that shifting workforce creates huge opportunity for us in education to change and certainly to deliver the right kind of outcomes holistically. And the world is changing. Sorry about that. The world is changing as it relates to this, and this is reflected in all the government priorities. And these are really, if you think about these three priorities, I would say 75% of all government leaders will categorize these priorities as their primary ones. Jobs and growth from an economic standpoint, enabling innovation across the country, and this is largely to create jobs and workforce, and transforming education. They're really just three things that all are exactly the same priority. These are really all about education, creating entrepreneurs, creating leaders, really investing in you to change the country, community, or society that you're in. And that's a huge priority for Microsoft and certainly what we do every day. Now, the implications of technology are huge, but we still have a long way to go. And when we think about technology, there's really a few things that we think about. Learning outside of the classroom is a huge issue. Now, when I talk to teachers, and I'm sure your research, you probably found this, one of the slides that I always love to present because of the reaction it drives. I usually have rooms like this, but they're more often filled with teachers. I put up a slide that says, your students are learning without you. And typically when I put that slide up, the teachers are almost fearful. It's almost like a horror movie, and I showed some really graphic scene, because they're nervous about this. And it's a really ridiculous reality that teachers are nervous that students are learning without them. Students are learning everywhere, anytime, any place, and that's a good thing. Normally, teachers should celebrate or cheer that reality. But the reality of schools, the school system, the institutions, are often to do the old paradigm of learning, which was you come to a place like this to hear someone like me on stage giving you information, and then at the end of the day, you'd be tested on it. The reality of learning today is it happens everywhere. You're learning not from the teacher, but from all the resources that you have across the internet, across the world, from each other. And the teacher's role is fundamentally different. It's to guide you on your journey, help you, inspire you to pursue your passions or create a richer expectation for your future. And that's the real value of what's happening, but it's often in conflict. Personalization is where that comes from. Serving and supporting the needs of every individual student. And I attest that many governments focus on the wrong thing. We have lots of focus on one-to-one learning, and I would say that most focus on the wrong one. The one that they're focusing on is the device or the PC, and not focusing on the one student. And in every country, the most important thing a government can do is help all of you and students who may not have the advantages that you do expect more from their future. And that's a critical thing that every government should prioritize, and certainly every teacher should strive for. And to be honest with you, it's something we take for granted. Students walk into schools all over the world, in inner cities, in tough environments, in countries with rich poverty. They walk into schools not expecting to change the world or expecting they can have any career that they dream of. And that's a challenge for teachers to really teach against students with those expectations. We have to do a better job there. I'll talk a little bit about new content dynamics and 21st century skills. Let me talk a little bit about 21st century skills as we go forward. The reality is classrooms look the same as they've done hundreds of years ago. And most folks will look at this, a picture like this, and say, yeah, this looks a lot like my classroom and things haven't changed a lot. But we have to do it in a lens for the workforce. And the workforce dynamics are really what drives the classroom input. So you see a different workforce today. And when I see a picture of a classroom there, I really care about what's happening inside the classroom. It's not about technology. It's not about smart boards, et cetera. What's the learning environment driving? And the appreciation of 21st century skills is a critical one, but it's not something that normally happens. Microsoft, one of the big things that we have in the United States is dropout in high school. And we also have a challenge with regards to science, technology, engineering, and math study in the United States. So at Microsoft, we looked at this and we said, one of the reasons why kids drop out is Algebra 1. And Algebra 1 is often a course where students lose their interest in math and science and they change course. If you interview students before algebra, they say, I love math and I want to be a scientist, etc. And after algebra, they say, I'm not interested in math. I want to go into sociology or history or political science, etc. So we did a lot of research on why that was. And we said, well, maybe it's the math teacher, maybe it's the curriculum, etc. So we did a project called Math Matters, and we actually had schools of Microsoft folks in research around the world looking at math teaching and math instruction. And what we found was common across all the schools. In some cases, there were great teachers. In other cases, there weren't such great teachers. But the students raised their hand and said, what does this have to do with the real world? Typically very early in the class. I don't know why we're studying this. What does this have to do with the real world? And often the problem was a connection with relevance. Students didn't see a relevant connection to the study. And the answer that many of the teachers gave was more damaging than the curriculum or teaching methodology. They often said, you need to know this because it's on the test. And that reality is what happens in many cases with regards to 21st century skills. Now, what we found was 21st century skills are never really taught in school. So math is, Algebra 1 is the foundation for abstract thinking. It's probably the first time students are asked, maybe outside of a religious class, asked to think about things in an abstract way without all the variables presented to them. And when the reality of what they're learning doesn't have anything to do with the physical world that they can see and feel. Now, the reality is most students start doing abstract thinking sort of by default, by osmosis. They don't really actually learn it as a discipline. So we actually said what we're going to do is put a module in the school for abstract thought. And we're going to teach students the value of abstract thinking and how it can be a powerful engine to drive many, many subjects, including algebra, as well as many, many careers where abstract thinking is a core. And the reality was the performance on the studies were much dramatically improved, but what really was impactful is students felt differently about math and science afterwards. They saw that as an expression of a powerful skill called abstract thinking. So because of that, Microsoft has been focusing on really shifting this dynamic and relevance and investing in 21st century skills. Now the good news is in 2015, PISA testing will include 21st century skills. So every OECD country in 2015 is going to take a test on how they perform in preparing students for 21st century skills. And it's really around 4 skill areas: the way in which we think, creative thinking, abstract thinking, etc., how we use tools like ICT to find information, how we work together collaboratively, and then also how we apply these tools for making a difference in the world. So the good news is the 21st century reality that the workforce is demanding is being reflected in the way in which schools will start to shift assessment. That's a big change. And schools are going to feel real pressure to really shift their thinking around assessment as we go forward. So that's important. So let's talk about the other drivers, and I want to talk a little bit about the content dynamics. Now, many of you have a device like this, and certainly there's nothing wrong with this device. I'm allowed to put it on a slide. And I actually don't make this comment as a criticism of this device. This is just a reality of technology. This is a powerful device. Many of you have powerful devices in your hands. If it has this Android device or Windows device, it doesn't really matter. But what technology has often been doing, especially in this generation, is reinforce the old paradigms. Now, we're very comfortable having a little bookshelf with little books and celebrating a nice little digital page turn, etc. And that's reflected in what happens in the learning environment. We have resources like Wikipedia, which say, okay, we're going to take an encyclopedia and move it into the internet. Now, in many ways, that's a necessary first step with regards to how technology evolves in our environment. But we have to push forward. Now, this is an example. I could show you a quick example. One of the things that we often see is technology just literally translating the others. And many schools around the world, when they buy computers, they say, the students didn't perform better in class. How do they, how come we bought a bunch of laptops and wireless in the classrooms and students didn't graduate faster or go to college more often, et cetera? And the reality was, in an automation world, you may make things easier, more efficient, but people don't have a different experience with regards to what they're learning and how they're learning. And there are many, many examples. But one I can show you quickly. This is an example. I found the U.S. incarceration rate in the United States. In 2005, there were 2.3 million people in the United States incarcerated. So you can go to Wikipedia, find that fact, and learn it, and maybe forget it by the test. I'll just go to a website. Now, the important thing about this website is that it comes from an artist. So one of the things about technology is there's got to be an expression of the full person. So art, emotion have to come into it. So this is an example of 2.3 million prison uniforms folded on top of each other. And when I go into this 2.3 million prison uniforms, let me do a refresh because I'm not sure if I have an internet connection. Once I go into this 2.3 million uniforms, you're going to see a different appreciation of what 2.3 million feels like or looks like. And as this comes in, you're getting a different sense of the problem. You may get a sense of the scale, and you may have an emotional reaction to what you're feeling. And that, whatever you feel or whatever happens when that experience takes place is a different kind of learning. You're actually using technology to drive something new. And that's what you all do when you collaborate and communicate. You're doing something that you couldn't do before. And we've got to really evolve technology to push hurdles. Now, Zooming specifically is actually an interesting paradigm. It can be a powerful context for learning and a different way to think about the way in which content can flow. And you can do very simple things or very powerful things to drive learning context. And actually, Microsoft is certainly focused on driving a lot of those as we go forward. Now, let me shift into work mode. There's certainly lots of new content dynamics that are happening inside the classroom to make it more immersive. And certainly, things like you're seeing here will start to become commonplace in classrooms for simulations, for use of very simple technologies to do powerful things. And the focus has got to be to transform what the learning environment can be like, to do different things that's possible. This is an example of synthesizing the digital world with the physical world. So I can have a physical cup with a digital ball. And that's a starting place for a publisher, for an artist, for an illustrator, to create rich, more immersive interaction. All with a simple camera and a computer and a piece of transparent plastic. So the environments that we're going to see are going to transform what we can do. So we've got to move beyond the automation phase that we're in and move much more to transformation. That's certainly a key focus for us. We also have to apply technology in practical ways. One of the things that I see in schools around the world is technology is often serving the goals of very limited perspectives because in most cases, schools start with computers. They drop computers into classrooms and then teachers say, how do I turn it on? How do I plug it in? How do I get this book to transfer to this computer? And what we've got to do is flip it. This is an example of a school in India. As you can see by that's a typical classroom, by the way. That's how crowded schools are in countries like Indonesia and Bangladesh, India. Schools are very crowded like that. And this is an example of technology really having a hard time in a traditional sense, really existing in that environment. So what they've done is they've focused on serving the students by creating a QR code that students could even color in on a piece of paper. And with a simple camera, you can see the computer on the back is actually tracking what students are inputting. The students hold up the piece of paper, if A is this way, B is this way, C is this way, and D is the other way, and they can have another side with different answers if they wanted to. Can participate in class, get involved personally, get more energy out of the class. Simple examples of providing technology solutions powerfully. So that's a reality of a simple environment. This is another example of a practical solution to something that we're trying to drive emotion or reaction for students. This is a bathroom in a school in Turkey. It's a very simple problem solved in a very ingenious way. One of the things that many schools around the world are trying to do because of the problems with water conservation is teach kids at an early age the importance of conserving water and the importance of water in their environment. Now they do this in this school, by putting a fish tank above the sinks in the lavatories. And what this does is as students wash their hands, they intuitively think that the water is draining from the tank, and they rush to wash their hands quickly so they don't drain the tank and save the water for the fish. And it's a very powerful example, very simple. This is the kind of ingenuity that we have to apply to education. It's about motivation. Now, one of the examples that does this often today is the impact of gamification and games-based learning. And this is a very, very powerful thing that we can do in education. Education and games share a tremendous opportunity to evolve together. And it's not just about the traditional immersive environments that you do, the Second Life types of stuff. It's about thinking about the motivation of assessment and how assessment in schools differ from the gaming assessment in very powerful ways. Now, this is an example many of you don't want to see, is an F or a bad grade on a test or a report. And the reality, what happens when you get these types of responses, students will say, I did a bad job, or I'm not good at math, I'm not good at science, I want to drop a course, etc. And when you play games, you see this quite a bit, but you don't go to your iPhone and delete the game on the phone if you lose the first time you play it. You try again, you get better at the game, you build skills to solve the challenge differently. Maybe you come up with answers that are unique to you to solve a problem. And one of the things that University of Washington is actually doing is researching learning as it relates to gaming. The traditional learning path is you learn from one individual, and you learn their way of doing it, their experiences in the world, etc., whether it was an author of a textbook or a teacher. And the reality is that learning could only be linear. The best you can do is learn a little bit or a lot of what they can bring to the table from their own experience or their own knowledge. The game world actually flips it. You start knowing very little about the game, and most students or people don't read the game manual or instructions. You just start by playing. And skills, the development of skills actually helps you progress along the game. And by the end, you often will find that your path across the game is very independent. For those of you who play multi-person shooter games and first-person shooter games like Call of Duty, etc., some of you may use some weapon types and others will use other weapon types. Some may decide to attack a map in a different way than others. There's a uniqueness that you bring into the game world that doesn't happen in traditional environments. Achievements can be very powerful. This is also happening in the real world. This is an example of the Ford Fusion hybrid car. You see on the little right-hand side, there's a little plant. That plant grows as you drive with more battery. If you use a lot of gas, it withers. So gamification happens. I have a toothbrush with a little smiley face. If I brush my tooth for 2 minutes, it smiles. If I don't, so there's things like that happening in gamification. Achievements are also happening in very powerful ways and potentially for curriculum. This is an example of a game called Geometry Wars. It was one of the first games to start using achievements. Now, the thing about this game is a game like Asteroids, where the goal is to shoot all the little boxes and you have vector graphics, and your goal is to basically destroy everything around you. But there's an achievement in the game called pacifism. And it basically is you get 15 points if you are able to survive for 60 seconds without shooting. Now, that's a simple thing, but think about it conceptually. The game, he's going to make it through, trust me. When this thing happens, the environment is not changed. The coders didn't have to program a new game. You didn't have to have a different template or what have you. The achievement itself is what's creating the different experience. So imagine that with your learning progression, or even in your workforce. How do you set achievements to create different outcomes, or even create different approaches to the work? It's a very, very powerful human motivation piece that we can bring into learning, bring into the workforce more dynamically. And this is the same exact game that you would play in a completely different way just by reinforcing achievements. And this is something that Microsoft is doing a lot of work with. We have an initiative called Just Press Play with Rochester Institute of Technology. And this is a gamification world that Rochester Institute of Technology has created for their students. And it's basically students get achievements from doing things in schools, like you would have gotten an achievement for showing up to this lecture if you were in RIT. And those achievements don't have any bearing on your grades, but students compete with each other to see who has the most achievements. There's one course in Rochester Institute of Technology called Undying. The achievement is called Undying. And it's because one of the courses in RIT is really, really tough. And it actually is tough in the second week. So what happens is students take the course, and by the second week, many students drop out. The third week, the students who stick it through find that the course gets much better and more fun and more interesting. But that first hurdle was always hard when they got the foundation of the course in place. So they put this Undying achievement in, which basically says that everyone gets the achievement if no one drops the course. And the dynamics that happen now are that the folks that are struggling with the course get help from everyone else in the class. Or if they miss school, the folks will show up to their dorm and drag them to the class because they all want to get the achievement to drop the course. And since they've had that achievement, no one has dropped the course. It's the same exact course. But the achievement has created a different community with regards to the students in RIT. So achievements are a very powerful trend that we'll see not only in games, but certainly in the workforce, connected to these broad 21st century skills that are driving the learning environment that's changing. So huge opportunity for change. I'm excited about the impact of the way in which these things will work and the importance of gamification on social networks and the way in which we're communicating and collaborating in the workforce. Huge, powerful opportunities for trends. And these are things that you're going to face when you get employed and start your own companies. The way in which you motivate employees is critical to the outcomes. The way in which you connect across a wide variety of medium is really critical. And the way in which you apply these things when you go to market to consumers and customers is critical as well. So a great opportunity for technology to play a role, but we've got to think beyond what we've been really comfortable doing, and that's really just transitioning the paradigms that we're familiar with technology. We've got to start to break new grounds on how we think differently with technology, and that's what I'm really excited about, not only in education, but in the world in general. So that's a quick introduction for me, and now let's have some interesting questions, hopefully.
Instead of doing a Q&A, we compiled some of the questions of our students today, and we'd like to ask them to you.
Shoot.
So we remind the audience that they may ask some Twitter questions using the hashtag that is right there.
So building on what you just discussed, we want to start by exploring a bit more the relationship of technology with education, and in particular how it relates to business students. Valentin?
So, well, you have mentioned the benefits of overhauling both education and technologies to improve the way we get smarter.
Sure.
And so don't you think that, say, learning using, for example, a laptop sort of affects concentration for people that are too young or too immature to use them? What?
I do think from young students, one of the things that I'm most concerned about is tablet devices. So tablet devices, whether it's iPads or Galaxy Tabs or what have you, Surface devices, often are given to very young kids, preschool kids, as their first computer. And because touch and natural user interface with those devices is very intuitive. But in general, those devices are consumptive devices more often than they are construction devices. I'd much rather have a student playing with blocks or a child coloring with a crayon and paper than actually just focusing on computers early age. I think that there's a huge risk that will create more consumers than creators in the culture and society. And that's a huge challenge I worry about. As it relates to technology in the classroom, I think we overemphasize it, to be honest with you. I'm less interested in technology dominating the class time. I'd much rather have real dialogue with students and educators, having students work together on projects, etc., and then leverage technology aggressively outside of the classroom when they need support and resources and learning in traditional ways or reading digitally, etc. Then I do think about the class time. Because for young students, sometimes teachers take 20, 30 minutes just getting the kids under control, and that's a challenge in classroom. So I think I embrace technology holistically in education and learning, but not necessarily as it relates to traditional class time. I'd much rather use it for interaction and creativity and discussion for teachers and students.
Well, that segues really well into our next question. You said in your presentation that when it comes to technology, education is really lagging behind, and you take the example of tests. But you say devices alone aren't going to help us change what we learn and how we learn, and teachers and students are going to remain the ones doing the teaching and the learning.
Yeah.
So is it really your role as Microsoft to work with teachers and students to improve the user-friendliness of technologies, or is it our role to be programmers and technophiles and to set our own standards for what technology can do?
Well, certainly I think technology companies have a responsibility to make technology easier, more efficient, more cost-effective, all that sort of thing. The reality, though, is we have to really move beyond what I would say, the how is what we've been doing in education. It's really been focusing on how we learn differently with technology. And most of it is how we educate people in a traditional way with computers. The big phase for education, I think, is going to be the what, and that's what we're teaching and testing. Now, the ridiculous reality is that with technology, with internet access, with ubiquitous access to internet services like Wi-Fi in places like France, although that's still a problem in some cases. I know the Wi-Fi is a problem in classrooms here. But the reality is huge opportunity, and those are going to be true in the workforce. When people go to workforce, they're going to have a device that they can get answers to quickly. And the fact that technology has created this huge paradigm shift and we haven't changed the tests in any fundamental way is a problem. And you can see this quickly if I basically handed everyone a test for 6th grade history, and I gave everyone, or probably everyone has, a device that they can search the internet with and find information, everyone would pass, not knowing anything about the subject because they have an ITC skill to find information and understand the basics of finding out how to answer tests. That's both sort of, I would say, a criticism of the test, what we're teaching and testing, and also how we use technology, because technology is still very much basic in terms of that environment. So I think we have to change what we're teaching and testing, and then I think also why is a big issue. We spend a lot of time on the how and maybe somewhat on the what, but not enough on the why. There's going to be disruptive times in education, specifically in higher education, where students question why they're in school. Why do they have to pay large tuition to a school or spend time in class when they can actually learn dynamically and start their careers earlier? And those dynamics will require schools to be much more focused on career progression and career preparation than they have been historically.
So you said the question is what we teach. In France, we are sort of faced with a shortage of people who can do HTML, people who can be database administrators, and so on. And so some entrepreneurs and political figures suggested that maybe we should teach code at middle school or primary school. What are your views on that? It's not being done yet in France.
I absolutely think so. I think the reality is not every student needs to be a developer, and technology doesn't have to be something that everyone can watch a movie. Everyone doesn't have to be a filmmaker. And that's certainly true with technology as well. But for the students who are interested, the opportunity to get interested as early as possible is there. There's, from MIT Scratch to a lot of things that even Microsoft has a product called Kodu, which teaches development concepts to very, very young children to get them to understand the consequences of programming and the power of and excitement of that creation tool. So I think certainly we should not limit it to any age. It's certainly not a discipline that should start in college. We have a program that we do called the Imagine Cup. 350,000 teams participate around the world. We opened it up to high school students a few years ago, and since we've done that, the high school students are on par with the university students in terms of the competitions, in terms of awards and recognition. In fact, the gaming categories are won consistently by high school students. So there's tremendous power as we go down to middle school and primary and secondary school students as well. But
you say it should be optional, not mandatory.
Absolutely. I don't think everyone should be a programmer, just like not everyone should be a doctor or scientist, etc.
How about teachers? Should they know how to code, and should they come to you with really realistic technological options for what they expect from products?
Certainly computer science teachers should know how to code or should understand the basics of technology, but I care much more about having teachers understand how to use a technology effectively to motivate students and to leverage the power of discourse and pushing students to their potential. Certainly, I don't think every teacher should know how to code. Certainly, I'd rather teachers know how to teach more effectively. And the way in which teachers teach in today's environment is going to be to get the most out of every individual student. They have to see a bar with an limitless potential and then try to raise the student's potential as high as it can go and then guide the students to the effective tools that they can personally seek to make that happen. That's the way education is transforming today, because technology can do a lot of the heavy lifting for teachers. The old days, teachers had to teach because there weren't any resources. If you think about it, your generation has had something that no other generation has had. No one has been able to have massively open, massively available access to information. No one's had a textbook that you can reference and learn about the exact same subject from different races, different genders, different countries of origin, different religious perspectives. People learn based on what they were given or who they were talking to, with limited options. So you can learn from a wide variety of sources from each other in a way that creates a huge opportunity for change. And that still is something that is a powerful tool that we often take for granted. But this generation of students is the first to really have it. 10 years ago, it wasn't even available.
Okay, so now we have a few questions about the strategy of Microsoft Corp, not specifically on education. Sure. So this one is a question that was asked on our Facebook page, like we announced you were coming and people asked questions. It was submitted by an IT guy in a French business, and he said, I've seen how sort of painful it was for businesses to evolve from Windows XP to Windows 7, and as an IT guy, I do not see any business evolving to Windows 8 anytime soon. So what is Microsoft's strategy to implement Microsoft 8 within businesses if it's the final aim?
Certainly one of the things I think we've been reflective of with Windows 7 and Windows 8 is actually making sure that the technology will run on the existing hardware and even actually run better on the older hardware. So the first thing is recognition, the path of upgrade, making it easy as possible. So Windows 8 does that. In many cases, folks with a traditional Windows 7 machine will find that it'll boot faster, get better battery life, and just perform more efficiently with Windows 8 than they had with Windows 7. There's also increased flexibility for business users on things like touch interface and the way in which we can distribute applications, et cetera, that businesses will respond to. So we're very confident that Windows 8 will have very good value for Windows. We're also very excited about Windows 8 Server, which is soon to launch, which is a very robust way which businesses can manage computers, et cetera. So the back end often drives a lot of what businesses think about. So the security environments, how we do drive encryption, how we do software management with updates and patches, all of that is built right into the Windows 8 thinking. And that's certainly something that will drive businesses. So our strategy, even though we don't think many businesses will often embrace touch and tablets for all worker types, with Windows 8, I don't have to choose between many, many different modalities. I don't have to have a team of people developing a line of business application for the truck drivers who have iPads, and then have a different environment to manage that data coming from a different back end for my desk workers who are running traditional Windows PCs. I can actually build one Windows application that takes data from the truck drivers selling and distributing products and pulls it right into my Windows 8 app that I'm having on a line of business desktop. That environment across those different learning and user modalities is one of the big values of Windows 8.
Sorry, the second question that was asked on Facebook on that topic is a little bit more controversial. The student said that it was probably fair to say that a lot of free open source software developed by amateurs and volunteers have been more in tune with the needs of users than a lot of Microsoft products. I'm thinking of the success of VLC, of Firefox, or even Wikipedia, as compared to Windows Media Player, Explorer, or Encarta a while back. How do you explain that discrepancy? It's not the investments, it's not the money. So what is it?
Well, certainly I think, first off, the reality is Microsoft is a big believer of making content available, open, and accessible. And certainly, one of the reasons why we moved away from Encarta was because of things like Wikipedia and the changing environment of information, et cetera. And actually, one of the best apps on Windows 8 is the Wikipedia app that's there today. We think differently about open source. There's lots of very strong open source initiatives in Microsoft, and we actually share source code via something called Codeplex, where we work with open source communities across the environment, as well as create platform environments. So we support XML, HTML5. In fact, most of the environments of Windows 8 are HTML5 and JavaScript. So very much with regards to open standards that people use across the environments, everything from SCORM compliance in Office to Open XML in Office and all the core standards that we use, embracing PDFs into Office to create our EPUB files. All that stuff is typical to what we do. So supporting open standards is absolutely there. The other thing is we're very flexible with regards to how our software works. Office 365 is available for free, but we also build it to run on all the platforms. So Office 365 will run on Chrome, Firefox, Safari, etc. So we think about cross-browser support as well as we do about cross-platform support. We build applications for people with an iPad can download OneNote, download SkyDrive, download Bing, use Office 365 and the Office web apps. And that's true with Android, etc. So we're very much focused on open platforms. And some of the competitors that we have in this space are much more closed. Our approach to the Windows Store, for example, we have many, many options for publishers and developers to sell their applications with no royalty to Microsoft. We don't lock people into a 30% royalty that other stores do, lock content and digital reading to specific platforms. So we're much more focused on making these things openly available and flexible. I think the perception is dated, frankly. I think the reality was there was a time in the transition of technology where Microsoft had legacy footprints with older paradigms that transitioned when the transition to open source and open available activities happened. And some of the technologies that you mentioned were changed in many cases or deleted. Things like Internet Explorer and Windows Media Player, et cetera, are technologies from an older paradigm where it was much more desktop PC based. So as things have changed, Microsoft has changed as well, and I think the perception still lingers, but the reality is actually I think we're doing better in this space than our competitors are.
Okay. We have one question from Twitter from Ibn Abder. He asks, maybe we can display it on the screen. Yeah, we have it. We have it here, too. You can look on the screen. He says, more and more people rely on technology to find answers here and now. Will we still remember what we learn in the future?
I think the reality is that's a really important question. So I think that memory often comes from doing the activity. So facts and figures, the sort of the foundation for learning is a challenge. So do I remember the specific dates, et cetera? That's a potential risk. But we find that students don't know that even today. Quickly after an assessment happens, students forget. So.
Okay.
I see we're losing some folks.
Sorry, thank you very much. We know many students have to go back to class. So thanks a lot, Mr. Salcito. Thank you, everyone, for attending this.
It's my pleasure.